morning. I too am optimistic about the state of Maryland, but for different reasons. This is my 9th year serving in the legislature, and I believe this is the first year in the 9 that I've been there that we're going to actually have the fiscal talk, what I call the talk, because we've run out of excuses and bookkeeping and federal dollars to where we actually have an ongoing discussion about the core question about the size and scope of government, and I think that's going to take place this year. I'm also optimistic in that while I'm not happy with the outcome of the election for the gubernatorial and statewide races, let's think about what the theme was during even for Governor O'Malley against Governor Ehrlich. Governor O'Malley struck a tone that he painted Governor Ehrlich as a tax and spend governor when he was governor. So basically we had a situation where we had a Democratic governor running on a fiscally conservative platform and made that stick against his opponent. So it wasn't the idea that he was going to go out and spend wildly and raise taxes that was the predominant theme in the gubernatorial race. It actually was the opposite. When the Senate President talks about the 2 seats that were picked up in the Senate by the Democrats, those 2 gentlemen that won those seats also ran on a fiscally conservative platform out in those particular districts and were successful again in saying that they were they were going to be guarding against spending increases and not necessarily supportive of tax increases. So even though the outcome was different, the actual principles that were fought, there was a little bit of the national election that crept into Maryland basically on the theme. And this idea of size and scope of government is really going to be talked out in a number of ways. When you look at the governor's budget, again, he holds K through 12 education basically flat with a slight decrease depending on how you look at it. But the real question is, K through 12 education is about $5.7 billion of a $13+ billion budget, and yet throughout the entire process here, we've held them harmless. Is there a way to do the K through 12 education with being able to trim, whether it be 5% as what was first floated, maybe as much as 10%, and still get the job done? That question I think we're going to talk about this year in the General Assembly. In the transportation area, we're going to have the talk, continuing on the issue between the tension between large new mass transit projects being proposed, the Purple Line in Montgomery County, the Red Line in the Baltimore area. And those are massive projects, multi-billion-dollar projects that are currently taking tens of millions of dollars of planning money out of the transportation budget, and the operating expenses of those systems indeed are very expensive. So will we set up a separate taxing authority to be able to for people who want that to pay for it? Will be an increase as in the past we talked about, an increase in the sales tax in those areas. There's a number of ways to deal with that, but that question will need to be sought out, because if you live as I do in a rural area, you don't share in those hopes and dreams in the mass transit areas, and yet we have projects much smaller in nature on the roadside that haven't been funded and really have a bleak future about being funded. So I think that's going to be a very interesting discussion. I think also as well, we're going to have an updated discussion on the slots and racing question. I serve on the Senate Finance Committee. The racing industry was before us. This is the 9th time I sat through that presentation. This was definitely the bleakest outlook for the industry. And it raises some questions as well as whether we can really deal with the changes that are going on in Delaware and Pennsylvania and West Virginia related to the slots industry, while we have to continually go back to a constitutional process and put everything on a constitutional referendum every 2 years if we so desire to make any changes. That business model, with the changes that are going on in gaming, are moving much more rapidly than we have the ability to cope with here in Maryland, and I think we're going to talk about that. I think we're also going to have an ongoing discussion related to whether the whole question between the rural areas of the state and the urban areas of the state. Some of the urban areas are in recovery mode while the rural parts of Maryland continue to be suffering from the recession. Some of the regulations that have passed in stormwater management and other areas in the environmental area have very costly price tags that on a percentage basis definitely have a major impact on the rural areas of the state relative to the urban areas of the state. As we make our trips through the rural counties, we begin to hear feedback about their struggle with trying to comply with these regulations and find the funding that they need to do that. I think that's going to be on the table. The agreement that the governor entered into with the state employees, the longer we look at this, has had some surprises in it over the last couple of weeks. We found out that there's going to be a $750 bonus paid, which aggregates about $49 million. think there's some discussion in Annapolis about whether that's appropriate. And for the first time, we're going to see the implementation of fees as much as $400 per employee that the union is going to be able to get from certain members of the state workforce that aren't members of the union. So I think we're going to have a discussion about that as well. You know, pensions, I just want to say, again, it looks every issue has its time, whether it's this year or next year, as the Senate President and the Speaker both alluded to, it will have to be dealt with. In effect, what we've done to the counties is give them what I call my teenage son, who's 18 years old, a credit card. We give him, hey son, here's a credit card, go out and spend it, mom and dad will pick it up at the end of the month. And then we're like shocked when we find out that he's run up a tremendous bill, okay? Well, the same thing's happening with our counties and the pension situation. You know, under the Ehrlich administration, that was about a $400 million number in the state budget. This upcoming fiscal year, it's approaching $1.2 billion of a $13 billion operating budget. To say that we're not going to touch it really kind of has a stick your head in the sand kind of mode, although there are significant implications. The other thing is we hear from the counties that they're under significant financial restraints as well. The flip side of that is they were granting raises to their employees at the same time we were going through furlough issues at the state level. So there's some fairness questions that need to be resolved there. This whole question of hospitals and how the governor's taken over $260 million out of the budget for Medicaid, it really might amount to basically a cost shift because the hospitals are expecting to pass that along through the rate setting process and have the insurance, those that are insured in Maryland, pick up those costs. Is that really a tax? I think some could make that question that it's really a hospital tax that's taking place here rather than just something that's disappearing out of the budget. It is appearing somewhere else in the budget. And finally, I just want to touch on the last several years, we've had an intense discussion about mental health issues in this state. We have moved the state institutions to being only those for the forensic patients or the criminals. That's where we house them. We've moved out the non-criminals out of our state institutions. The challenge with that is, particularly in the rural areas, is that the safety net within the community doesn't exist. So that issue continues to haunt both the urban and rural areas. I think we're going to have ongoing discussions relative to that. So from my perspective, this is about as exciting as it gets. I think it's a great time to serve in government. I think the legislature is in the process of grappling with very large issues, but having said that, I think time for these issues has come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all the panelists. And I